The night was supposed to be dazzling, the Ritz-Carlton, Manhattan, shimmering in gold and champagne light. The annual Bright Futures Gala had gathered New York's elite, billionaires, CEOs, and philanthropists. Cameras flashed like lightning against the marble walls. And among the glitter, Claire Sutton stood in the corner, one hand on her belly, 4 months pregnant, her heart beating against the sequins of her pale silver gown. She had spent all afternoon convincing herself that Nolan, her husband, would hold her hand when they entered the ballroom. He had promised. "It's our night, Claire," he said that morning, but he didn't arrive. When she tried to check in, the hostess at the entrance hesitated, then whispered, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sutton, your name isn't on the guest list anymore." Claire blinked. "There must be a mistake. My husband, Mr. Nolan Pierce, he's the event sponsor." The hostess lowered her voice. "He's already inside, with someone." Through the glass doors, Claire saw him. Nolan, tall, confident, tailored in a charcoal suit that matched the arrogance in his eyes, walked down the red carpet with Sloane Reed, a PR director barely 25, wearing a diamond necklace that sparkled cruelly under the lights. The same Cartier necklace Claire had once worn. The photographers surrounded them, shouting their names, capturing every smile, every brush of his hand on Sloane's back. Claire's knees weakened, but she forced herself to breathe. She wasn't going to make a scene. She walked toward the side entrance, only to be blocked by security. "I'm Mrs. Pierce," she insisted, her voice trembling. The guard checked his list and shook his head. "Mr. Pierce said you're not part of the guest party tonight." The humiliation burned deeper than any flame. People were starting to look. Someone whispered her name, others took out their iPhones to film. She turned away quickly, clutching her clutch bag like armor. Moments later, Nolan appeared behind her. His voice was smooth, almost pitying. "Claire, you shouldn't be here. You're making this harder than it has to be." She stared at him. "You erased me from the guest list of our own charity?" His lips twitched. "Our image matters, Claire. You're not stable right now. Pregnancy hormones, the anxiety, it's too much for the press." Her throat tightened. "You mean I'm too inconvenient for your image?" He sighed, pretending to be the victim. "You'll be taken care of. My assistant already arranged everything. The penthouse lease is terminated. You'll have a place in Queens. Don't make this ugly." Claire froze. The marble floor seemed to tilt beneath her. She was being erased, not just from a guest list, but from her own life. From inside the ballroom, applause erupted as Sloane's laughter echoed. Cameras captured Nolan's hand around her waist. He leaned in and said something that made Sloane blush as the Cartier bangle glinted under the chandelier. The photographers shouted, "Mr. Pierce, over here!" A flash went off. Claire blinked. For a moment she saw her own reflection in the mirrored wall. Mascara smudged, hand trembling over the curve of her belly, a woman watching her husband celebrate a betrayal in public. One reporter, curious, turned his lens toward her. The shutter clicked again, capturing the exact moment Claire walked away, eyes shining with tears that refused to fall. Outside, the December air bit into her skin. A cold wind swept down Fifth Avenue, lifting the hem of her gown. She stood there, alone, under the glittering skyline of Manhattan, the same skyline they once admired from their penthouse balcony. She pressed a hand to her stomach and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. But this is where we start over." Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. A text popped up. "Your credit cards have been deactivated. HR has removed your company access." Her breath caught. He hadn't just humiliated her, he'd cut her off completely. In that instant, something hardened inside her. The tears dried before they reached her chin. She lifted her head toward the skyscrapers glowing like gold crowns and murmured, almost to herself, "He may have the stage tonight, but the curtain always falls. And when it does, the audience will remember who truly stood tall." The rain started around midnight, pounding on the roof of a small roadside motel in Queens. Claire parked her old Toyota Camry, its wipers squeaking as if crying with her. She sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at her trembling hands. The silver Cartier ring still clung to her finger, cold, mocking. She twisted it off and placed it in the glove compartment beside a folded sonogram photo. Her stomach tightened. She whispered, "We're okay, baby. Mommy's here." Inside the motel, the fluorescent light flickered like a dying heartbeat. The carpet smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes. She handed her ID to the clerk, who barely looked up. "One night?" he asked. "Maybe two," Claire murmured. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, weak but controlled. She paid cash. Her credit cards had already stopped working. The phone on the counter buzzed with news notifications. She didn't have to look. She knew her husband's face would be all over the entertainment sites. Pierce debuts new love at Manhattan Gala. Room 14 was small, with thin curtains and a single buzzing heater. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her belly. The baby kicked faintly, like a reminder that she wasn't allowed to give up. Claire pulled out her cracked iPhone. No missed calls from Nolan. Just one from her Aunt Ruth earlier that evening. "Call me when you can, sweetheart." Claire typed back with shaken fingers. "I'm safe. Just need to rest." When she pressed send, a sharp pain shot across her abdomen. It wasn't unbearable, but it was enough to steal her breath. She leaned forward, breathing slowly, counting the seconds between the tightening. "Not yet," she whispered. "Please not tonight." Her phone vibrated again. A message from her bank. Account access suspended pending verification. Her heart dropped. That was her last lifeline. He had cut her off completely, even knowing she was carrying his child. Outside, thunder cracked. She pressed her palms against the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. For the first time, she realized how small she felt without his name beside hers. For years, Nolan's success had been her identity, his luxury car, his penthouse, his power dinners on Park Avenue. But now, stripped of all that, she saw herself differently. Alone, frightened, but alive. The contractions grew closer. She dialed 911, but her voice shook. I think I might be in early labor. I'm at the Queen's Motor Lodge, room 14. Within minutes, flashing red lights painted the window. The paramedics rushed her out, shielding her from the storm with a tarp. The rain soaked her hair, the thin silk dress clinging to her skin. Inside the ambulance, a nurse took her hand. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll take care of you." At the ER, the bright light stung her eyes. Machines beeped, voices murmured, and a doctor in green scrubs checked the monitor. "You're having contractions, but it's early. We'll keep you overnight to monitor the baby." Claire nodded, exhausted. They moved her to a small maternity room where the walls were painted soft yellow. A nurse brought her a cup of cocoa in a Starbucks paper cup, warm and sweet. Claire held it in both hands, letting the heat travel into her chest. It was the first warmth she'd felt in days. On the nightstand lay a thin hospital blanket and a folded brochure about support for expecting mothers. She smiled bitterly. Support. The word felt foreign. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Ruth. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. There's something you need to know about your grandmother's estate." Claire frowned. Estate? Her grandmother had passed years ago. She hadn't thought of that name, Eleanor Sutton, in forever. The baby kicked again, soft but firm, as if responding. Claire took a deep breath, staring at the ceiling tiles. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet strength flickered awake. Maybe, just maybe, life wasn't over. It was changing. She whispered to her unborn child, "Tomorrow we find out what's next." And for the first time since the gala, she fell asleep not as Nolan's discarded wife, but as a woman about to be reborn. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds. Claire blinked awake to the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside her. Her hands instinctively moved to her stomach. The baby's heartbeat was steady, strong. For the first time in days, she felt relief. A nurse smiled. "You're cleared to go home today, honey. Just rest and stay hydrated." Home. The word stung. She didn't have one anymore. By mid-morning, Ruth Sutton arrived, tall, elegant, gray hair pinned in a neat bun, wearing a navy trench coat that smelled faintly of Chanel No. 5. Claire hadn't seen her aunt in months. Ruth stepped inside quietly, her expression unreadable. "You look pale," she said softly. "Let's get you some air." They stopped at a small cafe across from Park Avenue, where the air smelled of roasted coffee and rain. Ruth ordered 2 lattes and placed a sealed brown envelope on the table between them. Her tone turned firm. "Claire, what I'm about to tell you stays between us. Your grandmother planned this long before she passed." Claire frowned. "Grandma Eleanor? What does this have to do with?" "Everything," Ruth interrupted. "She knew Nolan wasn't the man he pretended to be. She warned your father years ago. That's why she created a private family trust under your name." Claire blinked, speechless. "My name?" Ruth nodded. "It activates under one condition. when you have a child of your own, which, my dear, means now. Claire's heart pounded. She reached for the envelope. Inside lay a stack of neatly bound papers, stamped with Sutton Capital Holdings. The top page read, Beneficiary, Claire Eleanor Sutton Pierce. There were figures, 8 digits, maybe more, and ownership certificates for several properties across New York. She whispered, I don't understand. Your grandmother built this quietly, Ruth explained. She didn't want the men in this family, or the men who'd marry into it, controlling her legacy. The trust is legally separate from Nolan's reach. He can't touch a cent. Claire felt dizzy. Her entire body trembled, not from fear this time, but from something sharper, stronger. Hope. Ruth slid another document across the table. This is Maya Chen. She's a corporate lawyer. She's been handling Sutton matters for years. She'll walk you through the details. As if on cue, a woman in her 30s approached their table, confident but kind-eyed. She extended her hand. Claire, it's a pleasure. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. But you're not powerless anymore. Maya opened a folder and pointed to a signature line. You'll need to sign this acknowledgement of transfer. Once filed, the assets shift under your control. Nolan has no legal standing to claim or block it. Claire looked down at the page. Her hands trembled slightly. She reached into her bag, searching for a pen, but Ruth stopped her and pulled something out of her coat pocket. An old black Mont Blanc fountain pen. This belonged to your grandmother, Ruth said quietly. She used it to sign her first company charter. It's yours now. Claire held the pen carefully, feeling its weight, like history pressing into her palm. She signed her name slowly. Claire Eleanor Sutton Pierce. Each letter felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. When she finished, Maya smiled. Congratulations, you just took back your life. Ruth leaned forward, voice low but steady. You don't have to announce it, let him think you're broken. Quiet power lasts longer. Claire nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. For months she'd felt like the abandoned wife of a cruel millionaire. But now, she saw herself as something else entirely. The heiress her grandmother had always believed she could be. She whispered, half to herself, half to the unborn child. We're not victims anymore. Outside, the city hummed with life. Yellow cabs streaked past Fifth Avenue, and the sun reflected off glass towers like mirrors of possibility. Claire looked up, breathing deeply. It's time to learn how to build an empire. And somewhere in Manhattan, Nolan Pierce had no idea the woman he discarded had just inherited the power to destroy his kingdom. 2 weeks later, Claire stood in the middle of a tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn, sunlight spilling through dusty windows. It was nothing like the Park Avenue penthouse she once called home. No marble floors, no chandelier, no curated perfection. Just a creaky wooden floor, an old radiator that hissed, and a second-hand couch that smelled faintly of coffee. But it was hers, her space, her beginning. She placed her MacBook Air on the small table near the window and opened a new document titled Plan for Tomorrow. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. She started typing goals. Protect baby, stay silent, learn everything, never let him see me broken. Outside, sirens echoed through the streets. Somewhere, a kid laughed, a train rumbled. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. She made a cup of instant coffee, the cheap kind, and watched the steam curl into the morning air. Ruth had wired her enough from the Sutton Trust to cover rent and living expenses. But Ruth's final advice still rang in her ears. You have power now, Claire, but power without discipline will destroy you. Learn before you act. So she did. Every morning after breakfast, she opened her laptop and took online finance classes. Corporate structure, investment management, even accounting. She filled a notebook with formulas and highlighted key concepts. When her eyes blurred, she took short walks through Prospect Park with her belly growing rounder under her coat. Nights were harder. The city was loud, her mind louder. She often replayed the gala, the flash of Nolan's smirk, Sloane's glittering smile, the sting of humiliation. Some nights she cried quietly into her pillow, afraid her tears might somehow reach the baby. Other nights she found herself reading Atomic Habits on her Kindle, underlining phrases like, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. It became her mantra. One afternoon, her phone buzzed with a notification. Breaking news. Nolan Pierce expands into Beverly Hills real estate with new partner Sloane Reed. There it was again, his name shining across headlines. But instead of pain, Claire felt something different this time. Detachment. Let him rise higher. The higher he went, the harder the fall would be. She opened her journal and wrote 3 words in bold ink: build in silence. Later that week, Maya Chen called. Claire, everything with the trust is finalized. You're officially in control of Sutton Capital's charitable branch. No public announcement yet, per Ruth's request, but you'll get quarterly statements directly. Claire smiled faintly. Thank you, Maya. I'll keep learning. Maya's voice softened. Claire, you're stronger than you realize. Don't rush revenge. Let growth be your answer. That night, Claire sat by the window, scrolling through old photos of the penthouse, her wedding day, Nolan toasting champagne, both smiling for cameras. She deleted them all, one by one. When the last photo disappeared, she felt lighter. Then, as if the universe were testing her resolve, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Need a quote for the press, Mrs. Pierce? How do you feel about your husband's new love? She stared at the screen, then typed back calmly, no comment, but tell them, storms always end. She set the phone face down and watched the skyline fade into dusk. Hours later, she couldn't sleep. She brewed chamomile tea and opened her email. Among unread messages was one from an unfamiliar sender. The River Cafe, invitation, speaker event, rebuilding after ruin. Her eyes lingered on the subject line. That phrase, rebuilding after ruin, felt personal, almost prophetic. The River Cafe sat by the East River, with views of the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the bridge. It used to be Nolan's favorite restaurant for business dinners. The thought of walking into a place that once belonged to his world terrified her. But another voice whispered from deep inside. The same voice that had guided her out of the gala, into that motel, into survival. Go, it said. Go and see what's next. Claire exhaled slowly, looking down at her swollen belly. She smiled faintly. All right, she whispered. Let's see where this river leads. She didn't know it yet, but the next day she would meet the man who would help her rewrite her destiny. The next morning, Manhattan shimmered under a soft spring haze. Claire stood by the East River, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. She hadn't been to the River Cafe since her old life, when she and Nolan celebrated anniversaries under chandeliers and white roses. Now, walking in alone with a thrifted dress and worn flats, she felt like a ghost haunting her own past. Inside, the air smelled of espresso and polished wood. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved quietly between tables overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge. Claire checked in with the hostess. Reservation under Sutton, she said softly. The hostess smiled and gestured toward a small table by the window. The event was intimate, maybe 20 people. The topic, rebuilding after ruin, how to start again. A man stood near the podium, setting down his iPad and notes. He wasn't flashy, but something about him commanded attention. Dark suit, no tie, sleeves slightly rolled up. Confidence without arrogance. Good morning, everyone, he began, voice calm but firm. I'm Gabriel Hale, CEO of Hale Dynamics. Today isn't about business success. It's about what happens when everything falls apart and how you rebuild, piece by piece. Claire froze. Hale Dynamics. She recognized the name. It was a major tech firm Nolan once tried to partner with, but the deal had fallen through. Nolan called Gabriel, the man who never smiles. But Gabriel smiled now, faintly, as he spoke about loss, failure, and the quiet courage of beginning again. People think power comes from control, he said. It doesn't. It comes from endurance. His words struck something deep inside her. She sat straighter, listening as he described rebuilding his company after a betrayal by a co-founder. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who destroy you. But you still stand up, not for revenge, but for peace. Claire felt her throat tighten. It was as if he was telling her story without knowing her name. After the talk, there was a small networking session. Claire didn't plan to speak to anyone, she just wanted to leave quietly. But when she reached for her purse, a warm voice said behind her, "You look like someone who carries too many storms inside." She turned. It was Gabriel. Up close, his eyes were the color of worn leather. Steady, unhurried. He gestured toward the empty seat across from her. "Mind if I sit?" She nodded, unsure why. He didn't ask the usual questions. No what do you do? No where are you from? Instead, he said, you were listening, not just hearing. That's rare. Claire smiled faintly. Listening is easier when the words feel familiar. Gabriel tilted his head. Personal experience? She hesitated, then whispered, "Let's just say I know what it's like to lose everything." He didn't pry. Instead, he said quietly, "Loss doesn't define you. The silence after it does." The waiter arrived with 2 cups of coffee. The aroma filled the air, rich, comforting. Claire hadn't tasted real coffee in months. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, savoring the moment. "You're rebuilding," Gabriel said simply, watching her. "You just don't know it yet." Claire looked out the window at the skyline reflected in the water. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel strong again." "You already are," he said, his tone matter of fact. "Strength doesn't feel like lightning. It feels like getting up every morning when you'd rather disappear." She met his eyes. There was no pity there, just recognition. When she finally rose to leave, he handed her a business card. Gabriel Hale, CEO, Hale Dynamics. Below it, a handwritten line, "If you ever want to talk about building something new, call me." Claire slipped the card into her purse. She didn't even say goodbye, just smiled softly and walked out into the cool air. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of river salt and city smoke. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. Someone had seen her, not the broken wife, not the scandal, but the person she was becoming. As she crossed the bridge toward Brooklyn, she touched her belly and whispered, "We're going to be fine." What she didn't know was that this stranger, this man of calm eyes and quiet power, would soon become both her greatest ally and the spark that ignited her comeback. The pain began just before sunrise. Claire woke to a dull ache that quickly sharpened into rhythm. She gripped the edge of her small Brooklyn bed, her breath catching. The contractions were real this time, deep, pulling waves that rolled through her every few minutes. The city outside was still quiet, the kind of silence that comes just before the morning rush. She reached for her phone, 4:37 a.m. She tried to stay calm, timing the intervals like the nurse had taught her. 5 minutes apart, she whispered. "It's time." Her hospital bag was already packed by the door. Diapers, a blanket, a baby onesie with little clouds, and her grandmother's Mont Blanc pen tucked in the side pocket for luck. She slipped on a cardigan, grabbed her bag, and called a cab. The dispatcher said 10 minutes. Claire sank into a chair, whispering to her unborn baby, "Hold on a little longer, sweetheart. We're almost there." The cab ride felt endless. Rain started to fall again, streaking the windshield with silver lines. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, noticed her pale face. "First baby?" he asked gently. She nodded, breath trembling. "Yes, my husband. He's not here." The man gave a sympathetic nod. "Then you're twice as strong." At the hospital, nurses rushed her into a delivery room. The fluorescent lights glared down as voices blurred around her. "Deep breaths, honey. You're doing great," one said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Claire's world narrowed to the sound of her heartbeat and the relentless rhythm of pain. Hours passed. She screamed once, then bit down on her lip, determined not to. When the nurse told her to push, she thought of every humiliation, every betrayal, every tear she had swallowed. She pushed not just for birth, but for rebirth. Then, in a rush of air and light, a baby's cry filled the room. A boy. Claire broke. Tears streamed down her face as the nurse placed the tiny bundle on her chest. His skin was warm, his fingers impossibly small. "Hello, Theo," she whispered. "It's you and me now." The nurse smiled. "Theo, that's a strong name." Claire nodded. "He'll need it." Later, as the sun rose over the East River, golden light spilled into the hospital room. Ruth arrived, her eyes soft but shining with pride. "He looks just like you," she said, brushing a finger over the baby's hand. Claire smiled weakly. "Maybe he'll get Grandma Eleanor's stubbornness too." Ruth handed her a sealed envelope. "Maya sent this from the firm. It's official. You now control the Sutton family's full assets. Everything is transferred. You'll receive your first quarterly briefing in 60 days. Claire looked down at the document. Numbers, signatures, legal seals, all the power she never thought she'd hold. She was a mother and an heiress on the same morning. But all she cared about now was the tiny heartbeat against her chest. Ruth leaned close. "You don't have to rush revenge, Claire. Let him rot in his own lies. Live beautifully. That's the best punishment." Claire nodded slowly. "I will, but I'll make sure Theo grows up knowing the truth. His mother never gave up." As Ruth left, the room grew still. Claire turned toward the window, watching the skyline awaken, the same skyline that had once witnessed her humiliation. Now it glowed with possibility. She took the citizen watch from her hospital bag, the one she had bought with her last cash before the gala. She fastened it around her wrist. The ticking was steady, patient. It marked not loss, but time beginning again. Holding Theo close, she whispered, "One day, when you're old enough, I'll tell you how we started from nothing and built everything." She kissed his forehead, her eyes fierce with quiet fire. And somewhere in Manhattan, as Nolan Pierce toasted his new empire, he had no idea that the woman he erased had just given birth to his reckoning. Brooklyn's spring wind carried the smell of fresh coffee and street vendors' bagels as Claire pushed Theo's stroller through Prospect Park. He was 6 months old now. Bright eyes, a soft laugh, and the same stubborn chin as his mother. Each morning walk felt like therapy, a reminder that life could still be gentle. She rented a slightly bigger apartment, a second-floor brownstone with chipped paint, but sunlight streaming through every window. The baby's crib sat near her desk, where stacks of financial printouts and leadership books replaced the life she once had. Her old world had been glitter, champagne, and gossip columns. This new one was discipline, formulas, and quiet purpose. By day, she nursed Theo and studied. By night, when he slept, she sat before her MacBook Air and completed online courses in finance, philanthropy management, and nonprofit governance. She devoured every book Ruth sent: The 48 Laws of Power, Atomic Habits, and The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. She wasn't reading for comfort anymore, she was sharpening herself. Her goal was simple but clear: turn Sutton Capital's dormant charity fund into something alive, something that would make meaning out of her scars. "If I can help even one mother who's been abandoned like I was," she whispered one night, rocking Theo to sleep, "then none of this pain was wasted." Maya Chen called every few weeks with updates. "You've been officially named managing trustee of the Sutton Foundation," she said one evening. "You have control over $8.2 million in discretionary funds. How do you want to use it?" Claire looked around her small apartment, the sound of Theo's soft breathing filling the air. "We'll start small," she replied. "Scholarships for single mothers, housing programs, but no press, not yet." Maya smiled over the phone. "Building in silence. I like that." Meanwhile, Elijah Brooks, the PR consultant Ruth had mentioned, met Claire at a coffee shop in Dumbo. He was older, calm, and spoke like a man who'd seen too many scandals. "I cleaned up your online footprint," he said. "Every gossip article about the gala is gone from the first 10 search pages. You're a ghost now, in the best way." Claire took a sip of her Starbucks latte, nodding. "Good. I want to come back on my own terms." Elijah studied her carefully. "You don't want revenge headlines, do you?" She shook her head. "Revenge fades. Legacy lasts." That night, she drafted her first project proposal: Theo's Window, Safe Homes for Single Mothers, a digital platform that matched women in crisis with verified short-term housing funded by Sutton Capital. She coded the first page herself using tutorials on YouTube. Each click, each sleepless night, made her feel stronger. But the universe wasn't done testing her. One afternoon, scrolling through social media, she saw Nolan and Sloan smiling at a Beverly Hills fundraiser. The caption read, "Power couple donates to women's charities." Her stomach turned. He dares to use that word? For a moment, anger flared so hot she could hardly breathe. Then she closed the app and looked at Theo, who giggled as he played with his blanket. "No," she whispered. "We rise higher than lies." Weeks later, her email chimed. Subject line: "Private invitation, Leadership Summit, Hale Dynamics." Claire hesitated before opening it. Inside was a message from Gabriel Hale himself. "Claire, I remember your clarity that day at the River Cafe. We're hosting a closed event for emerging leaders rebuilding after adversity. You belong in that room." Her pulse quickened. She typed back, "Thank you, I'll be there." That evening, she set Theo in his crib and stood by the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline glowing across the river. 3 years ago, those same lights had made her feel small. Now they looked like promises. She whispered to her reflection, "He took everything from me once. Now I'm taking everything back, piece by piece." And as she hit send on her RSVP to Gabriel Hale, she had no idea that this invitation would ignite the comeback that would shake her ex-husband's empire to its core. The Hale Dynamics building stood tall against the Manhattan skyline, glass and steel gleaming under the morning sun. Claire stood on the sidewalk below, clutching a slim leather folder and her grandmother's Mont Blanc pen. Her heart raced, but her face remained calm. It was her first time back in a corporate boardroom since the day Nolan erased her from his life. Today, she wasn't walking in as someone's wife, she was walking in as herself. Inside, the lobby buzzed with quiet professionalism. Polished marble floors, a wall-sized digital display showing the company's latest innovations, and the faint aroma of espresso from the cafe near reception. Claire checked in, straightened her blazer, and rode the elevator to the 48th floor. The mirrored doors reflected a woman she barely recognized. Sleek ponytail, tailored navy suit, eyes that carried both pain and purpose. When the elevator opened, a soft hum of conversation filled the air. The Hale Dynamics boardroom was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River, sunlight glinting off the glass conference table. A dozen executives sat around it, murmuring as presentations loaded on sleek MacBook Pros. Gabriel Hale stood near the head of the table, his calm presence anchoring the room. When he saw her, his expression softened slightly. "Claire Sutton," he said, motioning her forward. "Thank you for joining us." Every eye turned toward her. She could feel the weight of curiosity, some recognizing her last name, others pretending not to. She nodded, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Thank you for having me." Gabriel gestured to the large screen behind him. "Miss Sutton is leading an initiative that aligns with our corporate social impact goals. Today, she'll present her proposal." Claire plugged in her laptop, the blue light flickering across her determined face. "Good morning," she began. "I'm the managing trustee of the Sutton Foundation. Our mission is simple: to create safe, affordable housing for single mothers in transition. The program is called Theo's Window." A murmur ran through the room. Claire clicked to the next slide. Data charts, case studies, success projections. "We've already piloted the model in Brooklyn and Queens, partnering with local landlords and city agencies. What we need is a technology platform to scale it nationwide. Hale Dynamics can help us build that." She spoke for 15 minutes. Clear, composed, every word rooted in purpose. Her hands no longer trembled when she mentioned single mothers. She wasn't ashamed anymore. She was proud. When she finished, silence filled the room for a heartbeat. Then one of the older executives leaned back and said, "Impressive numbers, Miss Sutton, but forgive me, why would a tech corporation partner with a housing charity?" Gabriel answered before Claire could. "Because impact and innovation don't live in separate rooms," he said simply, "and because leadership sometimes looks like resilience." The room quieted again. Claire met Gabriel's gaze, a small, grateful smile forming. The CFO raised a hand. "What's the timeline?" Claire clicked the final slide. 6 months to full implementation. Hale Dynamics gets exclusive platform rights. Sutton Foundation provides funding for development and maintenance. The goal isn't charity, it's sustainability. When she finished, Gabriel nodded slowly. "You've built something powerful here. We'll start integration next quarter." Applause rippled softly through the room. Claire exhaled, her shoulders finally relaxing. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a victim, but as a visionary. As the meeting adjourned, Gabriel walked over. "You spoke like someone who's lived every word." Claire smiled faintly. "I have." He handed her a small card embossed with Hale Dynamics logo. "My office will coordinate next steps. But Claire, what you're building matters. Don't forget that." Outside, she stood for a moment on the street, looking up at the shimmering tower. A gust of wind brushed her hair back, and in the reflection of the glass facade, she saw both versions of herself, the woman who was broken and the woman who rebuilt. She whispered, "You were right, Grandma. Quiet power lasts longer." And as she walked away, a new headline began brewing across the city. Heiress Claire Sutton partners with Hale Dynamics on groundbreaking social project. Nolan Pierce would soon read it, and realize the woman he threw away had just stepped into his world again, stronger than ever. It started with a single photo, an Instagram story that wasn't meant to last longer than 24 hours. Sloane Reed, Nolan's shiny new fiancée and self-declared brand visionary, had posted it without thinking. In the picture, she was lounging on a velvet sofa inside the penthouse Claire once called home. Her manicured hand rested lazily on a Cartier clutch. A glass of champagne sat beside a pile of papers. The caption read, "Manifesting our next empire. Power couple, Beverly Hills bound." But there was something else in the frame, something she hadn't noticed. Half hidden under the documents on the coffee table was a page marked NDA termination agreement with Nolan's company letterhead. And right next to it, a corner of another sheet showed wire transfer logs, amounts in the hundreds of thousands, all labeled Consulting S. Reed. By the next morning, a gossip blog had frozen the frame and zoomed in. The internet exploded. "Is Nolan Pierce paying his girlfriend from company funds?" the headline screamed. Within hours, screenshots flooded Twitter. Investors whispered. The company's PR team scrambled. In her Brooklyn apartment, Claire was spoon-feeding Theo oatmeal when her phone lit up with notifications. Maya's name appeared first. "Did you see it?" Claire frowned. "See what?" "Check your email. Elijah just sent everything." When Claire opened the file, she froze. It was all there. Screenshots, timestamps, metadata, proof of embezzlement disguised as consulting fees. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind was steady. For years, Nolan had called her emotional, irrational, weak. Now, the receipts said otherwise. Theo giggled, smashing his spoon into his bowl, smearing oatmeal across the tray. Claire smiled softly. "Looks like karma has good timing." Elijah called next. "I've verified the files. The transactions connect directly to Nolan's corporate account. It's not just unethical, it's illegal." Claire leaned back in her chair. "Then we need to protect the evidence before it disappears." "I already backed it up." "But Claire, this could get ugly. Are you sure you want to go there?" She looked out the window, at the Manhattan skyline that glimmered like an old scar. "He destroyed my name once. Now I'll let the truth do the talking." That evening, Maya and Elijah met Claire at her office inside Sutton Foundation's new Midtown workspace. The atmosphere was serious but charged. Maya placed a USB drive on the table. "We'll file this with the SEC anonymously. It'll trigger a compliance audit." Elijah added, "And I'll leak a sanitized version to a journalist I trust. They'll run it as a developing corporate story. You won't be mentioned." Claire exhaled. "Perfect. The less attention on me, the better." But fate had other plans. Within 48 hours, the Wall Street Ledger broke the story wide open. Exclusive, internal misuse of funds at Pierce & Co. sparks federal inquiry. The article didn't name Claire, but it didn't have to. People in New York's financial circles could connect the dots. Nolan's empire trembled overnight. In Beverly Hills, paparazzi caught Sloan leaving their mansion in tears. Her agency dropped her the next day. Nolan issued a defensive statement calling the allegations baseless attacks. But shareholders weren't buying it. Stock prices fell. Ruth called Claire that night. "You've been quiet through all this," she said. "That's the point," Claire replied. "I don't fight with words anymore. I fight with proof." Later, she sat on her couch with Theo asleep beside her. She scrolled through the headlines, then closed her laptop. Revenge didn't feel as sweet as she imagined. It felt clean, like balance being restored. Just as she turned off the lamp, her email pinged. A message from an anonymous account. "If you want the full truth, meet me tomorrow, 7 p.m., the Plaza Hotel lobby." Claire's pulse quickened. She reread it twice, unsure whether it was a trap or a gift. She forwarded it to Maya with a short note. "I'm going." The next evening, she would walk into the Plaza's golden lobby, unaware that the man waiting for her would hand her the missing key to Nolan's entire deception. And with one flash drive, the woman he left behind would hold the power to end his empire for good. The Plaza Hotel glowed like a golden cathedral against the Manhattan night. Claire stood at the entrance, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her pulse quick and steady. The chandelier above her threw shards of light across the lobby, reflecting off polished brass and mirrors. The smell of fresh lilies filled the air. Wealth, power, secrets. She adjusted the strap of her handbag where she had tucked a small recorder, just in case. She told Maya and Elijah her plan. 1 hour, no risks, meet in public. If something felt off, she'd walk away. But deep inside, Claire sensed this was important. At precisely 7 o'clock, a man in his late 30s approached her. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his eyes carried exhaustion, guilt, and something else. Fear. "Mrs. Sutton?" he asked, voice low. "Who are you?" Claire kept her tone calm. "My name's Daniel Reed," he said. "I was Nolan's financial controller before he fired me last year." Reed. The name hit her like a dart. "Are you related to Sloan Reed?" "Her brother," he admitted quietly. "And that's why I'm here. Because what Nolan did, what they both did, was bigger than you think. They moved to a quiet corner table in the palm court. A waiter appeared with menus. Daniel waved him off. "I only have 10 minutes, he said, pulling a small black USB drive from his pocket. "This contains every transaction Nolan tried to bury. Fake vendors, shell accounts, overseas transfers under Sloane's name. He's been funneling millions through the company for years." Claire stared at it, the tiny object that could end everything. "Why give this to me?" "Because he used me to make it happen," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "He promised me a promotion. When I refused to fake another audit, he threatened to ruin my life. He did. Now I want to clear my name." Claire folded her hands steady. "If I use this, there's no going back. You know that, right?" Daniel nodded. "Just promise me one thing. Don't let him destroy anyone else." He slid the USB across the table. It was light as air and heavier than truth. Before she could reply, someone's phone rang. Daniel glanced down, his face draining of color. "It's him," he whispered. "He knows I'm here." Claire's breath caught. "Go." Daniel shoved his phone into his pocket, stood abruptly, and disappeared into the revolving doors. Claire sat frozen for a moment, staring at the small drive. Then she tucked it into her handbag and rose, forcing her legs to move toward the exit. Her instincts screamed to get home, lock the door, and send the files straight to Maya. But as she stepped into the cool night air, a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. For a second, she thought it was coincidence, until the window lowered. Nolan's face appeared, smooth and venomous in the streetlight. "Still chasing ghosts, Claire?" he said, voice dripping with condescension. "You really should let the past die." Her heart thudded. "Funny," she said evenly. "You never cared about ghosts until they started haunting you." He smirked. "Be careful, sweetheart. You're playing in a world that eats people like you alive." She leaned closer, her voice cold as glass. "I built my world from ashes. You should worry about your own." For a heartbeat, they stared at each other through the half-open window. Two strangers who had once shared vows. Then he rolled the window up and the car sped away. Claire stood there a moment longer, the city's pulse throbbing around her. Then she reached into her purse, feeling the USB drive's sharp edge. Later that night, back in her Brooklyn apartment, she placed it on the table beside her MacBook. The cursor blinked on an empty email draft addressed to Maya and Elijah. Subject line: Final evidence. Theo stirred softly in his crib. Claire looked at him, her resolve hardening. "You'll never live in your father's shadow," she whispered. She attached the file and pressed send. The bar filled slowly, painfully. 1%, 30%, 78%, 100%. Sent. Outside, thunder rolled over Manhattan, shaking the windows. And with one click, Claire Sutton unleashed the storm that would finally bring her ex-husband's empire crashing down. The morning after she sent the files, the world felt eerily calm. The rain had stopped and the sky over Manhattan was pale and still, like the city was holding its breath. Claire sat by her kitchen window, sipping coffee, watching sunlight dance across the rim of her cup. Theo was in his high chair, babbling to his cereal like life was simple again. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something in her gut told her to answer. "Claire," the voice said. Deep, familiar, her pulse froze. "Nolan." For a moment, neither of them spoke. She could hear him breathing on the other end, slow, careful, like a man trying to sound calm while standing on the edge of a cliff. "I thought I'd never hear your voice again," he said. "I wanted to make sure you and the baby are okay." She almost laughed. 3 years of silence, and that's what you open with? "Things got complicated," he muttered. "I made mistakes. I want to fix them." Claire leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "You mean you want to fix your image? The press is calling, investors are running, and suddenly I'm worth dialing again." "Don't be cruel, Claire," he said. "We loved each other once." Her tone turned razor sharp. "You humiliated me while I was pregnant. You left me on a sidewalk like trash. That's not love, Nolan. That's cowardice dressed in Armani." There was silence. She imagined him pacing somewhere in his high-rise office, curtains drawn, jaw tight. The mighty Nolan Pierce, undone by his own lies. He tried again, softer. "We can make a deal. I'll give you whatever you want. Money, property, custody rights. I just need you to stay quiet while my team cleans this up." Claire felt something hot rise in her chest. Not anger this time, pity. "Do you hear yourself? You still think everything's a transaction." But dignity doesn't come with a price tag. He sighed, irritation cracking his composure. You're not thinking clearly. This could ruin us both. No, Nolan, she said, calm and cold. It will only ruin the guilty. You'll regret this, he hissed. You don't understand how ruthless this world is. She smiled faintly, eyes on Theo. Oh, I understand perfectly. You taught me. Then she pressed the speakerphone button. The call went live in the quiet kitchen. Ruth and Maya were sitting across from her, listening in as planned. Nolan had no idea. Ruth leaned forward, mouthing silently, "Keep him talking." Claire said smoothly, "Nolan, just to be clear, you're admitting you manipulated the books and paid Sloan through false accounts, right?" His breath hitched. "What are you?" "No, I?" "Because I'm recording this," she said calmly, eyes steady, "and I'm done being afraid of you." There was a sharp intake of air, then a furious click. The line went dead. Maya grinned. "Perfect timing. We've got what we need." Ruth reached over and squeezed Claire's hand. "You played with fire. You just lit the match." Claire exhaled slowly, adrenaline flooding her veins. For years she had dreamed of this moment, of having power in her hands, of hearing his voice tremble instead of hers. But now that it had happened, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. She looked out the window. Down below, people hurried across the street, ordinary lives moving forward. That's what she wanted now, forward. Later that evening, Elijah called from his office. "The SEC received the anonymous report. The recordings are in safe hands. You won't need to speak publicly unless you want to." "I don't," she said softly. "I just want peace." Elijah hesitated. "Then you've already won, Claire." She hung up, walked over to Theo's crib and brushed her fingers through his hair. The city lights painted gold patterns on the walls. "I'm not the woman he left behind," she whispered. "I'm the woman who left him behind." And across town, as Nolan's phone buzzed with headlines of an official investigation, he finally realized the truth. His greatest mistake wasn't losing his empire. It was underestimating the woman he tried to break. By Monday morning, New York was humming with scandal. Every major financial network had the same headline flashing across their screens. Pearson Co. under federal investigation for fraud and misuse of funds. Stock tickers bled red across Times Square. Reporters swarmed the company's headquarters, microphones raised, shouting Nolan's name. Claire watched the chaos unfold on her TV as sunlight streamed through her Brooklyn apartment. Theo was drawing on the floor with colored pencils, babbling about clouds. She muted the volume, breathing in the calm of her small, safe space. Her phone buzzed. "Elijah, the story's gone global," he said. "We're talking CNN, Forbes, Bloomberg. They all want to know who leaked it." "I didn't," Claire replied evenly, "and I never will." "Good," Elijah said, "because staying silent is what keeps your power intact. The world already knows who you are. They just haven't connected the dots yet." She ended the call and opened her email. Dozens of messages filled her inbox. Charities asking to collaborate, universities inviting her to speak about rebuilding after crisis. Her foundation's website, Theo's Window, had crashed overnight from too much traffic. People were donating, volunteering, sharing stories of survival. Ruth arrived with pastries and a Starbucks latte, her version of celebration. "You've started something real," she said, handing her the coffee. "This is what your grandmother dreamed of. A Sutton woman who changes lives quietly, not through scandal, but through grace." Claire smiled. "Grace doesn't trend as fast as gossip, but it lasts longer." Ruth chuckled. "And Nolan? He's falling apart. The board froze his accounts this morning. He can't even pay for his legal defense without approval." Claire looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline in the distance. Then justice is doing its job. By afternoon, Elijah arrived with updates from his PR firm. "We can shape this however you want. We can do an exclusive interview, frame you as a symbol of resilience, or we keep your profile low, let the results speak for themselves." Claire shook her head. "No interviews, no headlines about betrayal. I'm done reliving his mess. Let the truth breathe on its own." Elijah smiled. "That's exactly why it's working. You're not chasing revenge, you're embodying it." Later that evening, Claire's team gathered in the Foundation's small conference room overlooking the Hudson River. They were reviewing the beta version of Theo's Window 2.0, a digital platform that used Hail Dynamics tech to match single mothers with housing faster than ever before. Gabriel joined the meeting via video call, his face appearing on the wall screen. Congratulations, he said warmly. Traffic's up 600%. Investors are interested in expanding this nationwide. Claire smiled. We'll take it step by step, impact before expansion. Gabriel tilted his head. That's why people follow you, Claire. You lead from integrity, not ego. When the call ended, Ruth lingered by the window. You know he's falling for you, right? Claire laughed softly. He's a good man. But this time, I'm not rushing anywhere. I want to grow into the life I'm building. Ruth nodded. That's strength, the kind no man can take. As night fell, Claire took Theo for a walk along the Brooklyn Bridge. The city lights flickered like constellations below them. She looked at her son's tiny hand gripping hers and felt something pure, peace. Across the river on Wall Street, cameras flashed as Nolan exited a courthouse in handcuffs, his once perfect image reduced to a scandal headline. Reporters shouted questions, but his eyes were hollow. In her apartment later, Claire turned off the TV. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply whispered to herself, "It's over." Then she opened her journal and wrote, "When you rise with truth, you never have to scream. The world makes the noise for you." She closed the notebook and tucked it beside her laptop. Tomorrow, she'd go back to work, helping women like her find their footing again. Because her story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding the kind of world where women never had to beg for dignity again. 2 months passed since the storm broke. The news cycle had moved on from Nolan's downfall, but the echoes still lingered in whispers through Wall Street. Claire, however, had moved in silence, building, learning, living. The Sutton Foundation had grown faster than anyone expected. Theo's window was now helping hundreds of single mothers across New York find safe housing. The chaos of her past had turned into clarity. Yet one presence kept crossing her mind: Gabriel Hale. Their partnership had deepened since the day she presented in his boardroom. They spoke almost daily, sometimes about business, sometimes about everything else. He had a quiet strength she trusted, the kind that never demanded attention. But lately his tone had changed. Softer. Curious. Warmer. That afternoon she sat across from him at a cafe near Bryant Park. The summer air carried the scent of roasted almonds and espresso. Gabriel wore his usual dark suit, but his jacket hung loosely on the chair beside him, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked less like the stoic CEO she first met, more like the man behind the title. He watched her stir her coffee absent-mindedly. "You've been different lately," he said. Claire smiled. "Different good or different bad?" "Different brave," he said. "You used to guard every word. Now you speak like someone who's not afraid of losing." She looked out the window, watching people rush past. "Maybe I lost everything once and survived. After that, fear loses its teeth." Gabriel leaned back, studying her. "You know, most people in our world use power to protect themselves. You use it to protect others. That's rare." She shrugged lightly. "Maybe that's why my ex never understood me. He wanted a trophy, not a mirror." His eyes softened. "And now?" She met his gaze. "Now I'm learning what it means to belong to myself." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, sunlight danced on the glass buildings like rippling gold. Gabriel broke it gently. "Claire, I know this is complicated, but I'd like to take you to dinner. No contracts, no projects, just us." Her heart skipped. "Are you sure? My life isn't exactly scandal-free." "I don't care what the world whispers," he said simply. "I care about the woman who turned pain into purpose." Claire's chest tightened. Part of her longed to say yes instantly. But the other part, the one that had rebuilt herself from nothing, hesitated. She smiled softly. "Let's finish the quarter first. If I can still stand after the next board review, I might let you buy me dinner." Gabriel chuckled, nodding. "Fair deal." When she returned to the office, Ruth was waiting, arms crossed, knowing grin on her face. "You were with him again, weren't you?" Claire rolled her eyes. "We had coffee. That's it." Ruth smirked. "You know what coffee leads to when the man listens more than he talks." Claire laughed, shaking her head. "He's different, Ruth. He doesn't try to fix me. He just stands there quietly, like he believes I can fix myself." Ruth's expression softened. "That's the kind of man worth keeping." Later that night, after Theo fell asleep, Claire sat on her balcony overlooking the Manhattan skyline. She opened her MacBook, scrolling through financial projections, but her mind wandered back to Gabriel's words. Different, brave. She thought of how far she'd come, From a broken wife standing outside a gala to a woman leading her own foundation, she had fought for every inch of her peace. Maybe, she thought, love didn't have to mean losing yourself this time. Her phone buzzed. A message from Gabriel. "Don't forget, some victories deserve to be celebrated, not analyzed." Claire smiled, typing back, "I'll celebrate when the women we help don't need to knock twice to be heard." He replied with a single line, "That's why I admire you." She closed her laptop and leaned against the balcony rail, the night breeze soft against her skin. Below her, the city lights shimmered like 1,000 tiny affirmations. She whispered to herself, "This time, if I fall, it'll be forward." And in that quiet moment, Claire realized she wasn't afraid of love anymore, because she'd finally learned how to love herself first. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of Pearson Co. felt longer than usual, though Claire knew it wasn't the steel and glass holding her breath hostage. It was the moment itself. After years of silence, humiliation, and rebuilding, she was walking back into the company that once erased her name from its walls. But this time, she wasn't walking in as a discarded wife. She was walking in as a shareholder, a member of the Sutton Trust, and the woman holding the evidence that could end Nolan Pierce's career for good. The boardroom smelled of fear and expensive cologne. Long mahogany table, leather chairs, a skyline view of Manhattan that used to symbolize power and now felt like exposure. Reporters weren't allowed inside. This was a closed internal hearing, but everyone who mattered was here. At the head of the table sat the interim chairperson, a stern woman in a gray suit who had no patience for ego. To her left, Nolan, his once polished charm replaced by a pale, desperate mask. His tie hung slightly crooked, his eyes bloodshot. And across from him, calm and composed, sat Claire Sutton, her grandmother's Mont Blanc pen in hand, a quiet storm wrapped in silk and poise. The chairperson began, "We're here to review the financial misconduct allegations against Mr. Pierce. Miss Sutton, as a shareholder and whistleblower, you have the floor." Claire stood, sliding a small USB drive across the polished table. "These are verified records," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "They include wire transfers to falsified vendors, offshore accounts, and unauthorized payments to Miss Sloan Reed." Nolan shifted in his seat. "Those files were stolen. They're inadmissible." The chairperson raised an eyebrow. "The forensic audit confirms their authenticity, Mr. Pierce. Continue, Miss Sutton." Claire clicked her laptop, projecting graphs and documents onto the large screen. Numbers filled the room, cold, undeniable. "The funds Nolan used weren't just from corporate profits," she explained. "They were taken from employee pension reserves and reclassified as consulting expenditures." A low murmur rippled through the board. One of the investors slammed his hand on the table. "You risked our people's retirements for your mistress?" Nolan's composure cracked. "It was temporary. I planned to fix it before year-end." Claire's gaze didn't waver. "You can't fix integrity after you sell it." He glared at her. "You think this makes you better than me? You wouldn't even have this without my name." Her lips curved faintly. "You're right, Nolan. I wouldn't have this without you. But not because of your name, because of your betrayal. You taught me that silence feeds corruption." The chairperson cleared her throat. "We'll proceed with the vote for removal." The board members raised their hands one by one. 11-1. Nolan was officially stripped of his title and ordered to surrender all controlling shares pending investigation. He stared at Claire, disbelief twisting into anger. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You're nothing without this circus. I made you who you are." Claire stepped closer, her voice low but lethal. "No, Nolan, you made me start over. I made me who I am." He looked ready to lash out again, but security entered the room quietly, waiting for instruction. The chairperson nodded, and Nolan was escorted out, his shoes echoing down the marble hall like the end of an era. When the door shut, silence hung heavy. The chairperson turned to Claire. "Your grandmother would be proud. The Sutton name stands for integrity again." Claire exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. She signed the closing documents with the same Mont Blanc pen Eleanor once used to build her empire. As she left the building, cameras flashed from the street below, shouting her name. She didn't stop. She didn't need to. She walked past them all, sunlight glinting off her pale blue coat, each step steady and free. And as Nolan's empire crumbled behind her, Claire Sutton finally understood. Revenge had never been her victory. Redemption was. 6 months after the boardroom battle, New York was blooming again. Central Park glowed gold under the afternoon sun, and for the first time in years Claire felt peace. Not the fragile kind that could be broken by a headline, but the kind that lived deep in her bones. The chaos was over. The investigations had ended. Nolan Pierce was officially disbarred from his company, fined and disgraced. The Sutton Foundation had flourished, helping thousands of women rebuild their lives. And now Claire Sutton was getting married. It wasn't a grand gala or a society spectacle. It was a small, private ceremony under the cherry blossoms near Bethesda Terrace. The guest list fit on one page. Ruth, Maya, Elijah, a few close friends from the foundation, and Gabriel Hale, the man who had seen her strength before she even recognized it herself. Claire wore an ivory dress, simple but elegant, her hair pinned loosely with pearl clips. No diamonds, no designer sponsorships, no magazine photographers, just honesty, sunlight, and quiet laughter. Theo, now toddling on his chubby legs, was the ring-bearer, wearing a tiny bow tie and clutching a satin pillow as if it were a treasure chest. Ruth fussed with Claire's veil, eyes glistening. "You look like your grandmother on her wedding day, only braver." Claire smiled. "Eleanor would have told me not to cry." "She would have said crying ruins mascara," Ruth replied, laughing through her tears. Gabriel stood beneath the arch of blossoms, wearing a navy suit. When he saw Claire walking toward him, his usual composed demeanor softened completely. She took each step slowly, steady, remembering the path she'd walked to get here. Every scar, every sleepless night, every time she almost gave up. But today wasn't about what she'd lost. It was about what she had built. When she reached him, Gabriel whispered, "You sure about this, Sutton? Once you marry me, you're stuck with my terrible coffee and late-night emails." She smiled, her voice trembling just enough to betray her heart. "I've survived worse than caffeine addiction." Laughter rippled through the small crowd. The officiant cleared his throat, smiling. "Do you, Gabriel Hale, take Claire Sutton to be your wife?" Gabriel's eyes never left hers. "I do, with all the respect, love, and patience she's taught me." "And do you, Claire Sutton, take Gabriel Hale to be your husband?" Claire looked at him, seeing not power or status but partnership, the kind built on truth. "I do," she said softly. "Not because I need you, but because I choose you." When he kissed her, the world seemed to pause. The city noise faded, the breeze stilled, and somewhere above them, petals drifted down like blessings. Theo squealed and clapped, shouting, "Mommy!" Everyone laughed. After the ceremony, they gathered at a nearby terrace for a small dinner. Candlelight flickered off glasses of champagne. Elijah toasted first. "To Claire," he said, "who turned her pain into purpose and found love in the ashes." Maya raised her glass. "And to Gabriel, for recognizing a queen when he saw one." Claire blushed, shaking her head. "No queens, just a woman who learned to stop kneeling." Later, as the evening deepened, Gabriel took her hand and led her onto the path overlooking the lake. The skyline shimmered in the distance, reflections of light scattered across the water. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first met you at the River Cafe, I thought you looked like someone who'd forgotten how to breathe." "And now?" she asked. He smiled. "Now you look like someone who owns the air around her." Claire leaned into his shoulder, closing her eyes. "Maybe because I finally stopped chasing what was never mine." He kissed the top of her head. "What's yours now is peace." She looked out over the glittering city, the same city that once watched her fall, and whispered, "Peace, and a future worth protecting." And under the soft Manhattan night, with her son in her arms and her new husband beside her, Claire Sutton finally lived the ending every strong woman deserves. A quiet one built on love, not revenge. The annual shareholder conference for Pierce & Co. was held at the Midtown Convention Hall, the same place Nolan once delivered grand speeches about integrity and innovation. This year, the irony was too poetic to ignore. The banners with his name had been removed. The giant glass doors that once opened to applause now led to murmurs and suspicion. Inside, hundreds of shareholders, journalists, and employees filled the room, waiting. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and tension. Security guards stood by the doors, whispering into earpieces. It was the company's first public assembly since Nolan's removal, and the agenda was clear: reveal the final findings of the federal investigation. Claire arrived quietly, escorted by Maya and Elijah, She wore a tailored black suit and minimal makeup. No theatrics, no flash, just calm authority. She had not planned to speak. She was there as an observer, not a spectacle. Still, her presence turned heads. Some saw the woman who exposed corruption, others saw the ghost from a scandal that had nearly destroyed them all. Reporters whispered as she took a seat near the front. That's her. The ex-wife, the whistleblower, the heiress. At the podium stood the interim chairwoman, Miss Avery. She tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. Today marks a pivotal moment, not just for Pierce & Co., but for accountability itself. Behind her, screens lit up with official seals and audit summaries. Numbers, names, transfers. It was all there. Millions siphoned into personal accounts, shell companies in offshore jurisdictions, payments made under fake vendor names. The audience gasped collectively as the evidence unfolded line by line. Claire sat motionless, hands clasped in her lap. She didn't need to look at the slides. She already knew the story. They were her files. What she hadn't expected was how surreal it felt to hear her ex-husband's crimes recited in front of hundreds. Miss Avery continued. Based on these findings, Mr. Nolan Pierce has been permanently barred from holding executive office in any public company. He will also face restitution penalties totaling $48 million and serve a 5-year probationary sentence. The crowd erupted into whispers. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back, a reporter muttered, "Justice finally has a face." Claire didn't smile. Justice wasn't sweet. It was solemn. It wasn't about victory. It was about balance restored. Then came the final segment. Future of Pierce & Co. Miss Avery turned toward Claire. Before we close, I'd like to acknowledge Miss Claire Sutton, whose integrity brought light to years of deception. She reminds us that silence enables corruption. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, rippling across the hall. Claire rose, stunned. She hadn't expected recognition, let alone gratitude. She nodded once, humbly, then sat back down. Maya leaned close, whispering, "Your grandmother would be so proud." Elijah added quietly, "That's history being written right there." Suddenly, the side doors opened. A commotion swept through the crowd. Nolan Pierce walked in, escorted by his lawyer. He looked thinner, haunted, stripped of arrogance. The cameras pivoted toward him instantly. He spotted Claire. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met across the room. Time froze. He tried to smile, a ghost of the charm he once wielded so easily. But Claire didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She simply rose, turned her back, and walked out. The applause swelled behind her, drowning out the sound of his lawyer's frantic whispers. Outside, sunlight bounced off the glass towers, reflecting in her eyes. Gabriel was waiting by the car, his hands in his pockets. When he saw her, he smiled softly. "How did it go?" She took a deep breath, the air cool and clean. "It's over," she said. Gabriel opened the door for her. "No, Claire, it's just beginning." As the car pulled away, she looked out the window one last time at the building that had once symbolized her downfall. And in that moment, she realized true revenge was never about destruction. It was about walking away free, with nothing left to prove. The chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton glittered just as they had 3 years ago, but this time the light felt warmer. The annual Bright Futures Gala, the same event where Claire Sutton had once been humiliated and erased, was happening again. Only now, her name was printed in gold on every program, not as a guest, but as the keynote speaker and title sponsor. Outside, luxury cars lined Fifth Avenue, photographers shouting names as New York's elite stepped onto the crimson carpet. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with excitement and champagne laughter. Yet beneath the glamour, there was a new tone: respect. Everyone knew the story. The woman once discarded was now the heiress, the philanthropist, the CEO's wife. Claire stood behind the stage curtain, taking a quiet breath. She wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk, simple, elegant, powerful. Around her neck shimmered the same Tiffany pendant she had worn the night Nolan humiliated her, now restored and repurposed, no longer a reminder of loss, but of reclamation. Ruth touched her arm gently. "You're ready, my dear. Time to rewrite the memory." Claire smiled faintly. "No revenge speeches tonight?" Ruth winked. "Just truth." When the MC announced her name, the applause was thunderous. She stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding for a second. But instead of feeling small, she felt infinite. 3 years ago, she began, her voice steady. "I stood right here, but not as a speaker. Back then, I was invisible. I was someone's wife, someone's shadow, someone's shame. But life has a way of burning away what doesn't belong. What remains," she paused, scanning the crowd, "is who you truly are." The room fell silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. Claire continued, "Tonight, we're here to celebrate women who rebuild, women who turn tragedy into transformation. Theo's Window, the project many of you have supported, has helped over 2,000 single mothers across the country find safe homes. That's not charity. That's justice." Applause filled the room again. Loud, genuine, proud. At the side of the stage, Gabriel watched her with quiet admiration. He had seen her rise from heartbreak to power, from fear to leadership. Tonight, she wasn't just his wife. She was a force. As she concluded her speech, she said softly, "Sometimes, the most powerful thing a woman can do is walk back into the same room where she was once broken, and smile." The crowd rose to its feet. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back, unnoticed by most, Nolan Pierce stood in the shadows near the exit. His once perfect posture slumped. The room that once worshipped him now applauded her. For a moment, their eyes met again. This time, she didn't look away. She didn't flinch. Her expression was calm, unreadable, a queen acknowledging a fallen pawn. Then she turned toward the audience and bowed slightly, her smile radiant. After the event, Gabriel found her near the terrace, the Manhattan skyline glowing behind her. "You were magnificent," he said softly, wrapping his arm around her waist. She rested her head against his shoulder. "It's strange, isn't it? The same place, the same chandeliers, but it feels like a different universe." "Because you are different," he said. "You didn't come here to prove them wrong. You came to prove yourself right." She laughed quietly. "That's the secret, isn't it? Real power isn't revenge, it's peace." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the lights of the city ripple in the river below. Claire glanced at her reflection in the glass, strong, steady, unafraid. Inside, guests mingled, whispering about her speech, about her transformation, about how poetic life could be. As they left the ballroom hand in hand, she looked over her shoulder one last time. The stage lights dimmed, the crowd faded into soft chatter, and for the first time, she didn't feel haunted by the past. She felt grateful for it. Because that night, in the same place she once lost everything, Claire Sutton finally realized she had never been the story's tragedy. She was always its turning point. The courthouse on Center Street was a world away from the glittering ballrooms of Manhattan. Its marble pillars were tall and cold, its echoing hallways lined with cameras, reporters, and the hungry scent of scandal. It was Judgment Day. After years of lies, headlines, and legal maneuvers, Nolan Pierce's fate would finally be decided. Claire stepped out of the black car, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. The air was crisp, almost metallic with tension. Flashbulbs exploded as photographers shouted her name. But she didn't flinch. She wore a simple charcoal suit and her grandmother Eleanor's pearl earrings, symbols of quiet legacy. Gabriel walked beside her, his hand brushing hers gently. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She had fought this battle long before he arrived. Inside the courtroom, everything smelled of varnished wood and anticipation. The federal seal glimmered behind the judge's bench. Rows of lawyers murmured over papers. Nolan sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than Claire remembered. His once slicked hair was graying at the temples. His eyes, once sharp, were sunken and tired. When he saw her enter, he straightened his tie out of habit, a reflex from a life built on appearances. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Claire saw it. The recognition that she was no longer the woman he could manipulate. The judge entered. Court is now in session. For hours, testimonies unfolded. Accountants, auditors, former employees. Each witness told the same story in different words. Fraud, deceit, greed. Nolan's defense tried to spin it as poor oversight, but the evidence was a mountain no one could climb. The USB files Claire had delivered months ago were now official exhibits. Each line of code, each false invoice, each transfer painted the portrait of a man who thought he was untouchable. When the prosecution called Claire to the stand, the room hushed. She walked forward, every step deliberate, her heels echoing in the silence. She swore the oath, took her seat, and looked directly at the jury. "Mrs. Sutton," the prosecutor began, "can you explain why you came forward?" Claire took a breath. "Because truth doesn't belong in shadows. I spent years being silent, believing silence was safer. But silence protects the wrong people. Her voice didn't shake. She spoke clearly about what she'd seen during her marriage, how Nolan controlled every detail, how he used power like a weapon, and how, when he was finally caught, he blamed everyone but himself. The defense attorney tried to rattle her. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Sutton, that you have a personal vendetta against my client?" Claire smiled faintly. "No, I had one once, but then I realized revenge is temporary. Accountability lasts forever." Gasps rippled through the room. The judge nodded approvingly. By afternoon, the case closed. The jury left for deliberation, and time seemed to stretch endlessly. Claire sat quietly, staring at the carved wooden panels, her fingers tracing the edge of the Mont Blanc pen she'd brought for luck. After 3 hours, the jury returned. The foreman stood, unfolding a single sheet of paper. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Nolan Pierce, guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted. Cameras clicked. Reporters scrambled for exits. Nolan's face went pale. He turned toward Claire, mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound came. 2 marshals stepped forward, guiding him away in handcuffs. His silver cufflinks, the ones she had bought for his birthday years ago, glinted under the fluorescent lights before disappearing into the hallway. Claire exhaled slowly. No tears, no triumph, just peace. The kind that comes when justice finally fills the space where pain once lived. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight streamed through the courthouse steps as she walked out. Reporters shouted questions. "How do you feel? Do you forgive him?" But she didn't stop. She simply said, "The truth doesn't need forgiveness. It just needs light." Gabriel met her at the car, pride shining in his eyes. "It's over," he whispered. Claire looked back one last time at the courthouse doors, then smiled softly. "No," she said, "it's finally beginning." And as the city roared with headlines of justice, Claire Sutton stepped into the sunlight. No longer a victim, no longer a survivor, but a woman who had rewritten her own verdict. Spring returned to New York with soft light and quiet promise. The storm was over. The headlines had faded. Nolan Pierce was serving his sentence somewhere far away, his empire dismantled, his name no longer whispered in the corridors of power. For the first time in years, Claire Sutton woke up without fear. Only purpose. Her mornings began early now, just after sunrise. She'd sit by the kitchen window, a cup of coffee steaming beside her, and watch Theo chase the first rays of light across the hardwood floor. He was 3 now, bright, curious, full of laughter. Every time he giggled, Claire felt a piece of the world stitch itself back together. This morning was special. It marked the official launch of Theo's Window Foundation headquarters, a new state-of-the-art community center in downtown Manhattan. What had started as a small digital platform had grown into a national initiative, providing housing, education, and job training for single mothers. There were offices, daycare spaces, and even a quiet meditation room that Claire had personally designed. She dressed simply, a white blouse, black trousers, and her grandmother Eleanor's pearl earrings. No need for power suits anymore. Her power spoke for itself. As she arrived at the new building, banners waved in the soft wind. Opening day, Theo's Window, building futures, one family at a time. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Dozens of volunteers, families, and local journalists filled the lobby. Ruth greeted her with a proud smile. "I still remember the night you told me this was just an idea," she said. "Now look at it, it's bigger than the Sutton name." Claire laughed softly. "That's the point. It was never about legacy, it was about people." Maya appeared next, holding a stack of documents. "The first 50 families move in this week. We've got national coverage lined up, but I kept the press statement simple. Just the story. No drama, no mention of the past." "Good," Claire said, signing the last page with her Mont Blanc pen. "The past already wrote its own story. This one's for the future." As guests began to gather, Gabriel took the stage to introduce her. His voice carried warmth and pride. "Most of you know Claire Sutton as a business leader, a philanthropist, and a survivor. But to me, and to everyone who's worked beside her, she's something rarer, a builder. She didn't just rebuild her life. She built a bridge for others to cross." Applause filled the room as Claire stepped up to the microphone. She looked out over the crowd, faces of mothers holding children, volunteers, partners, friends, and felt her throat tighten. "When I started Theo's Window," she began, "it wasn't about charity. It was about dignity. I know what it's like to lose everything, to wonder where you'll sleep, to hear people call you weak. But weakness isn't falling. It's refusing to rise again. Every mother here has risen, and now we rise together. Tears glistened in Ruth's eyes. Maya clapped the loudest. Theo, sitting on Gabriel's lap in the front row, waved his tiny hand. "Mommy," he shouted proudly. Claire smiled through tears. "That's why I named it Theo's window, because light always finds its way in." After the ceremony, she walked the halls of the new center. Each room was filled with color, murals painted by children, laughter echoing off fresh walls. A young mother approached her shyly, holding a baby girl. "Miss Sutton," she said, voice trembling, "because of this program I have an apartment now. My daughter has her own bed. Thank you." Claire reached out and squeezed her hand. "No," she said gently. "Thank yourself. You chose to start again. I just built the window. You stepped through it." As the sun dipped lower, golden light spilled across the lobby floor. Gabriel wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You did it," he whispered. Claire looked up at the shining glass letters above the entrance. Theo's window. She smiled, her voice soft but certain. "No, we did it." And as laughter and light filled the space where pain once lived, Claire Sutton finally understood. Her greatest victory was never in courtrooms or boardrooms, but in every life she helped rebuild. The city shimmered in the late summer dusk, its skyline painted in amber and rose. From the rooftop terrace of their home overlooking Central Park, Claire Sutton watched the sun sink behind the glass towers. The air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine from the garden pots Gabriel had insisted on planting himself. Below her, the world buzzed as always, but up here, everything was quiet. Theo was inside with Ruth, laughing over a pile of Lego bricks. His voice carried through the open doors, full of joy and light, a sound that never failed to remind Claire how far they had come. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, letting the evening wind brush against her face. Gabriel stepped onto the terrace, 2 mugs of hot chocolate in his hands. "You've been staring at the skyline for 10 minutes, he teased, handing her one. She smiled softly. "Just thinking." "Dangerous habit for a CEO, he said, leaning against the railing beside her. "Not dangerous," she replied. "Necessary. It reminds me that I survived." He watched her for a long moment. "You didn't just survive, Claire. You rebuilt everything they tried to destroy." She looked out at the city lights, glittering like promises. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real. The foundation, the families, the peace." "Believe it," he said gently. "You earned every bit of it." For a while they stood in comfortable silence. Below them, car horns and laughter blended into a distant hum. Claire could see the new Theo's window billboard near Columbus Circle, a mother holding a child, the words, "Every ending has a beginning." It wasn't about marketing. It was about meaning. Ruth appeared in the doorway. "You 2 lovebirds coming in for dinner? Or do I have to eat Gabriel's cooking again?" Gabriel laughed. "It's not that bad." "Tell that to the smoke alarm," Ruth muttered, disappearing back inside. Claire chuckled, shaking her head. "She'll never stop being the boss. And you wouldn't have it any other way," Gabriel said. He turned to her then, more serious. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Always. What would you tell the woman you used to be? The one standing outside that gala 3 years ago?" She took a deep breath. "I'd tell her to stop waiting for someone to save her, that everything she needs is already inside, and that one day she'll stand right here, with peace, love, and a life she built herself." Gabriel smiled, his eyes soft. "You sound like a book I'd read twice." She nudged him playfully. "Careful, I might quote that at my next speech." Inside, Theo's laughter rang out again. Claire turned to watch him, small and bright, his world untouched by the darkness she once walked through. "He'll grow up knowing the truth," she said, "that his mother didn't break when life got cruel." Gabriel nodded, "And that kindness can be strength." The first stars began to appear above the city. Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out her grandmother Eleanor's Mont Blanc pen, the same one that had signed her redemption, her freedom, and her foundation. She placed it on the railing. "It's funny," she said quietly. "This pen built empires twice. First Eleanor's, then mine. But the real empire isn't in paper or signatures. It's in people." Gabriel looked at her, admiration shining in his eyes. "You are your grandmother's legacy, Claire, and one day, Theo will be yours." She smiled, blinking back a tear she didn't bother to hide. "Then we did it right." As the night deepened, they went inside. Dinner was simple. Pasta, laughter, a little spilled juice. Claire didn't need chandeliers or applause anymore. Her home was filled with something far richer. Safety, love, and laughter. Later, after everyone slept, she stepped back out onto the terrace one last time. The city glowed like a living heartbeat beneath her. She whispered to the wind, "For every woman who's ever been broken, may you rise higher than you ever fell." And as the stars burned brighter above Manhattan, Claire Sutton finally knew the truth. The greatest revenge is a peaceful life, lived loudly in the light. So, that's where our story ends. But if you're still here right now, my friend, then something in Claire's journey must have touched your heart in a quiet, honest way. Maybe because, deep down, we've all been her at some point. Broken, betrayed, and forced to start over when the world stopped believing in us. What Claire's story reminds us is this: peace is the greatest revenge, and rebuilding yourself is the most powerful act of defiance. Like the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." Healing doesn't come from wishing things were different. It comes from choosing who you become after everything falls apart. So, if you're standing in your own storm right now, remember this: you are not the pain that happened to you. You are the strength that's still standing after it. Let Claire's story be your proof that new beginnings are real, that dignity can rise from ashes, and that the quietest victories are often the loudest. If this story spoke to your soul even a little, please like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, someone else needs to hear that it's never too late to begin again.